The widow of Nain, N-A-I-N, Nain. That's where we are tonight. If you'll turn with me, we're going to be in Luke chapter 7, starting in verse 11. Luke chapter 7, verse 11. Jesus has interactions with a widow. We'll talk more about the widow in just a minute. But Jesus has interactions with a widow who's leading a funeral procession. The funeral is for her son, her only son. In Luke chapter 7, verse 11, this is how it starts. It says, soon afterwards, Jesus went to a city called Nain. And his disciples were going along with him, accompanied by a large crowd. You know I'm a map guy, so just a couple of maps to get us going here. I always, when I put a map up, I have the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. The Dead Sea being the big water at the bottom, the Sea of Galilee, the smaller water at the top, just to show all of Israel. I'm going to bring up a smaller map now that has this box in it. You with me? You see Nazareth right there in the middle. I'm trying to show you where Nain is. It's an interesting place. Can you see it there? Right here at the bottom. You can see from that, if you look closely, this is a topographical map, and you can see that Nain is on a hill. It's elevated. It's on Mount Moreh is where it is, M-O-R-E-H, Mount Moreh. And it's interesting because there was another raising of a dead person on that mountain 1,500 years before Jesus got there. And that was, or maybe not 1,500 years, maybe 800 years. And that was in 2 Kings chapter 4 when Elisha raises a widow's dead son on the very same hill. I'd love to go into that. I'd love to say more about it, but I've said this before, and I want you to track along with this as you read in the Old Testament about Elijah and Elisha. Remember that Elijah, Jesus Christ himself said, if you will believe, then John the Baptist performs the role that Malachi said Elijah would play. Remember that? John the Baptist is the Old Testament Elijah. When you get to Elisha, Elisha is the person that Elijah, the person that came after Elijah as the great prophet of Israel. So how Elijah corresponds to John the Baptist in very, very many ways, Elisha corresponds to the work of Jesus Christ. And I'd love to talk about that more. Remember, just a couple of thoughts. Number one, they both raised a widow's son from the dead. The other thing about Elisha is, remember the story of the axe handle. An axe flew off a handle. It fell to the bottom of a river. The person that had borrowed the axe was terribly concerned about the fact that he would get in trouble. He didn't have the money to replace the axe. And Elisha, by the power of God, caused something that shouldn't float to float. The axe head came to the surface of the water. The man walks into the river and grabs the axe head. Now tell me, what is it that Jesus did? What did he do? He walked on water. What shouldn't float, floated. Jesus Christ walked on the surface of the water. There are several things in the life of Elisha, and the miracles that he did that mirror things that Jesus Christ would do when he was here. Maybe I'll pick 5 or 6 of them sometime and we'll go through them because it's very interesting. He's a type of Jesus Christ to come, that's all. He's a type. And a lot of the things that Elijah did were a type of what John the Baptist would do. Remember, John the Baptist even dressed like him, with the leather belt and the camel hair and all of that. Very interesting, Elijah and Elisha and John the Baptist and Jesus Christ. But let's get into the story here. It says, soon afterwards he went into a city called Nain. I have another map. Oh, just to show you that Nazareth and Nain, they're about 6 miles apart. Just so you get an idea of distance. This area right here, this flat area, is the plain of Jezreel, the Jezreel Valley, where the Battle of Armageddon will take place. So that's where we're at, Nain. Again, Mount Moreh is the name of it, so you can find it when you go back to 2 Kings and read the story of Elisha. You'll see it there. Soon afterwards, Jesus went into a city called Nain, and his disciples were going along with him, accompanied by a large crowd. It says in verse 12, "Now as he approached the gate of the city, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a sizable crowd from the city was with her." So the whole city, a sizable crowd from the city, is in this funeral procession as they're walking her dead son out to be buried outside of the city of Nain. A little bit about being a widow. It was a desperate situation in Israel to not be protected by a male relative. A desperate situation. There was no husband to support you financially. She had no husband to support her financially. No way for a widow to earn a living. In the year 33 AD, this was a desperate situation. She had a close male relative that was to take care of her. That was her son. But now she sees her son carried out. Her son has died for some reason that we're not told. Her son has died. So the widow's son would have been the one to care for her, any of her sons. This lady only has one son, and he's dead. So she really is in an unprotected, desperate situation as an Israeli widow. This widow's only son is dead. She is in a bad way. Look what it says in verse 13. Knowing all these things that I just said, Jesus, in verse 13 it says, "When the Lord saw her, he felt compassion for her, and he said to her, 'Do not weep.'" A couple of words here. A couple of words. He felt compassion. The two words "felt compassion" are translated by this one word. Actually, all three words, "he felt compassion," are all translated by this one Greek word, splonk. Isn't it an interesting word? Splanknizome is how you'd pronounce it. Splanknizome. The splanknon, this comes from another word. The splanknon is a word that means your inner parts, your inner body parts, your intestines, your guts, we might say. And it's supposed to be, it's at least seen as the seat of a human's emotions. Now, I don't mean our emotions emanate from our bellies, from our guts, from our splanknon, but that's the way the Greeks used the phrase. That's the way they used the phrase. So it refers to the inner parts of the body. The word splankna, our bowels or our guts, and they're considered the seat of our emotions. What it means, the way it's being used here, is to be deeply affected. To be affected deeply in one's inner body. We use a phrase nowadays, you might say, "Man, I felt it in my gut." That's exactly what they're saying. That Jesus, when he saw this widow come up, had a deeply affected change in him as he saw the situation that he saw. He saw a woman weeping, and he told her, "Do not weep." He had pity on her. He felt sympathy for her. He understood the situation. The word "do not weep" here. So now we know that Jesus, when he saw her, was affected deeply. This wasn't just a miracle that he did. This affected the man Jesus to see this weeping widow, and he stepped in to change her situation. He tells her, "Do not weep." And the word "weep" is the word "klio," and it comes, it's in the imperative mood here. There are two commands here. Jesus gives the widow a command: stop weeping. Joy has come today. You just don't know it yet. Stop weeping. And the second command, as we'll see in a minute, is when he tells the boy, "Wake up." So two commands here to weep. But what does it mean? What was the woman doing? The word means to cry openly and profusely from sadness or distress. To cry openly. In the funeral procession, she was crying. She was crying out loud. Everybody knew it. She was crying profusely, the way a Jewish wailer would, because in her heart there was great sadness because she had lost her son, and also great distress. Now this woman is in a horribly unprotected situation as a Jewish widow. Jesus says, without her knowing it yet, you don't have to be sad. You don't have to be in distress. I've come to change everything. So Jesus, who is felt compassion, it says, splanchnizomai, Jesus, who is deeply affected by the widow's sadness, tells her to stop being sad, stop being distressed, because joy has come to your city today. An interesting aside, why is it that you think Jesus, it says here, when he saw her, when the Lord saw her, and if there's this large crowd, as it says there was, a sizable crowd from the city was with her, but Jesus was able to very clearly see the widow, it's because he saw the widow first. There's an interesting thing in Jesus' day. In those days, Jewish women led the way in a funeral procession. Can anybody think of why? Not Roman women, not Greek women. In the Jewish society, Jewish women led the way in a funeral procession. Why would a Jew make a woman go first when death is involved? There is an old Jewish commentary that says women who brought death into the world, remember it was Eve who handed the fruit to Adam. And so the Jewish commentary says women who brought death into the world ought to lead the way in a funeral procession. Interesting. Edersheim, if you want to look it up. Verse 14 says, he came up and he touched the coffin. So Jesus Christ, if you go back into the Old Testament, you read, if you touch anything dead, you become unclean. Jesus isn't concerned with becoming unclean. The Son of God can't become unclean, especially when he's going to turn this death into life immediately. So Jesus actually walks up as a Jew, risking uncleanliness, ritual uncleanliness for 7 days. Jesus walks up and he touches the coffin, and it says the bearers came to a halt. I want to look at the coffin just for a minute. What is going on here? How did they bury the dead in ancient Israel? They didn't bury the dead like we bury the dead. This is a better notion of what a coffin would have, the kind of coffin we're talking about here. It's the Greek word soros. S-O-R-O-S. Ring any bells? Soros? Know anybody named Soros? This is a very interesting definition when you think of who George Soros is in the world. An open platform to support a corpse prior to burial, often carried to the graveside. That's what this Greek word means. That's how the Romans or the Jews would have carried a body on something open and flat, more like a gurney than a closed-in wooden coffin. The boy wasn't in a coffin. The boy was to be laid in a tomb like Jesus was. Remember that Jesus was wrapped up in death clothes. They put aloe and all the, not aloe, yeah, it was aloe, wasn't it? Aloe and myrrh and spices on him. And then they laid him in a tomb. That's how they buried people then. So this is what it would have looked like. A soros, the word that's translated coffin, is an open platform to support a corpse. You can see the handles on the side of it for the bearers. Would have looked something like this, with women in the entourage in the front. Not only the boy's mother, but the wailing women, the Jews that would have come to cry with her. That's more of the picture that we're looking at, a wrapped up body. It makes better sense as you go through the story because Jesus doesn't open the coffin lid. When you think coffin and I think coffin, it's not what the Bible in Jesus' day, it's not what the Bible or what the coffin would have been. So Jesus comes up and he touches this item. He doesn't touch the boy, he touches this soros, and the bearers immediately stop. So it's interesting, you wonder whether the widow and the bearers of her son's body had already understood who Jesus was. Remember, this is 6 miles from Nazareth. Not 600 miles. It's right down the road. It's very close. It's like 21 miles as a crow flies to the city of Capernaum. where Jesus did most of his ministry around the Sea of Galilee. I wonder if the bearers stopped because they knew who Jesus was. And all he had to do was say, stop. They didn't say, sir, we can't get out of the way. We're going, no. Jesus came up and touched it, and the bearers stopped. And what does Jesus say? He says, young man, I say to you, arise. Here's the second command. Jesus tells the boy, egairo, in the imperative mood. It's a little bit different, but this comes from this word egairo. It means to raise up. To raise up. So Jesus tells this boy to wake up and arise out of bed. He's telling him to raise to life. So if you were sleeping, the word egairo means to raise up. So if you're sleeping, your mother may walk in the room and say, get up, it's time to get up. It's time to egairo, to stand, to wake up and arise out of bed. It also means to raise from life, or to raise to life, which is what Jesus is doing here. Has much more connotation than simply wake up. The man is dead. It's very clear the man has no blood flowing through his body, no breath. The man is dead. The boy, the young man is dead. Jesus says, young man, I say to you, arise. I can only imagine what the widow is thinking right now. Verse 15 says, the dead man sat up. At the command of Jesus Christ, death woke up. It says, the young man sat up and began to speak, instantly and completely alive. And Jesus gave him back to his mother. Jesus gave him back to his mother. The mother who was weeping because of deep sadness and distress. No more cause for weeping, no more cause for distress. Jesus presented the woman's son back to her alive. An interesting word. I want to look at this word just for a minute. Not about the widow and not about the son as much as about Dr. Luke. Interesting that Dr. Luke would use this word because this is a medical word. It's a medical word, anakathizo. Luke tells the boy, or Luke records that what the boy did was that he sat up. This word only occurs twice in the Bible, and both times Dr. Luke. And this, I'm telling you, only twice in the Scriptures. Here in Acts chapter 9, verse 4, this is what it says in Acts chapter 9, verse 4. Who wrote the book of Acts? Dr. Luke. But Peter sent them all out and knelt down and he prayed, and turning to the body, another rising of a dead body from the grave. Peter raises Tabitha here and he says, Tabitha, arise. And she opened her eyes. And when she saw Peter, she sat up. And there's that word anakathizo. When you go outside of the Bible and you look for this Greek word, you find it in medical documents. It was a doctor's word. It wasn't a word that you or I would use. Anakathizo was a doctor's word. Very interesting that Dr. Luke doesn't just say that the boy came back to life, but he also comments on his physical posture. Because he's a doctor and that's what he's interested in. He was asking different questions. So now I can show you this picture again. A different picture of the crowd gathering and the young boy Jesus having touched this coffin, this Soros, and he tells the boy to arise, and the boy comes back to life and starts to speak, and there he is sitting up. And what does Luke want to know? Did he jump off? Was he carried off? Did you drop it down? What happened with the body? I want to know how death becomes life and how Dr. Jesus did this, the great physician. And so Luke asked those questions, and that's how he wrote it, that he sat up. Very interesting. This is the first time in the Bible. This is the first time that Jesus raises someone from the dead. This is the first resuscitation to human life that Jesus performs, the widow of Nain. Before we close tonight, just a quick word on resuscitation versus resurrection. It comes up from time to time, and every time it comes up, there seems to be a misunderstanding. Jesus resuscitated this boy. He gave him his life back, the same life he had a couple of days earlier when he died. He did not resurrect this boy to immortality. The boy wasn't raised in a glorified human body. Notice that he was still wrapped up, certainly in the picture, but even on the soros in the coffin, on this open thing, the boy was still in the condition that they were carrying him to the grave in. When Jesus was resurrected, he left the grave clothes, did he not? He didn't need them. He was in a glorified human body. This boy needed them. Lazarus, when Lazarus came out of the tomb, he had to be unwrapped. He was still in his grave clothes. He was resuscitated. He was given life back, but it was the same life he had before. So before we look at a couple of things on this slide, this is what I'm trying to say. This boy that Jesus just raised from the dead, gave life to again, this boy's soul and his spirit had departed from his body. He had died. He had separated. His soul and his spirit had separated. That's what the word thanatos means, the word death. It means separation. What Jesus did when he told him to arise was put the soul and the spirit back into that same body, and that same exact body was given life again. That body lived again with no changes to the body. Same mortal, dying, sinning body. It also means the fact that Jesus resuscitated this boy, that he would die again one day. He would have to die again one day. He gave him his natural, mortal life back. So this boy would have a second funeral one day. Isn't that something? Who wants that? His mother, I'm sure, did. So what does it mean to resuscitate someone or to have resuscitation? It means to bring one. This is a Cambridge English Dictionary definition here, these first couple of lines. This is what it says in the dictionary, not the Bible. To bring someone who is dying back to life. They do this in ambulances all the time. They pick you up at home and they bring you back to life. You're coding, they do whatever they do. They bring you someone who is dying, not dead. They bring them back to life. They resuscitate you. It also means to wake someone who is unconscious. This is just an English dictionary. It means to bring something back into use or existence. Now we're getting closer to the Bible's definition, to bring something back into existence. So when Jesus Christ raised this boy on this day from the dead, this human being was raised, and this resuscitated person is still mortal. He still has to die again. He's still a mortal, sinning human being, complete with his sin nature. He's the same kid. Exactly the same kid, only he doesn't have whatever ailment or whatever injury caused his death. That's been cured. Other than that, he's the same boy. Now the difference in resurrection, I have the Greek word there, anastasis. The difference in resurrection is entire. It's completely different. When someone is resurrected, it means to bring back to life. More Cambridge English Dictionary. It means to live again. What does it mean to be resurrected? To bring something back to life or to live again. And this resurrection of the Christian, the biblical resurrection, is the event when humanity is restored to life in an eternal body. This boy was not returned to life in an eternal body. This boy was returned to life in the same 19-year-old body, whatever age he was, in the same body he had when he died. His same mortal body is resuscitation. He was not resurrected. He was resuscitated. He was given his life back, the same life. Resurrection is different in that human body is restored to a life of eternity, immortality, imperishability. And we all wait for that day, don't we? At the rapture of the church, we'll be changed in the twinkling of an eye. will be raised immortal, raised imperishable. That's only happened to one person so far in all of the universe. Who's that? Jesus Christ.
He went to Abraham's bosom at that time, right?
He went to Abraham's bosom because he said that the Son of Man would be in the belly of the earth, like Jonah was 3 days in the belly of the fish. He went down to proclaim to those there that he had defeated death, and to the angels, the demons in Tartarus. A whole different story, but yes, you're right. He went down, but then he was resurrected to eternal life. That was within those 3 days when he was in the grave, when his body was still in the grave. I wrote there that this resurrection will occur for believers and unbelievers. And what I mean by that is that everybody lives forever. But not everybody lives forever in the presence of God in heaven. If someone has left this earth never having believed in Jesus Christ as their Savior, they will also receive a resurrected eternal body, and that body will be put into the lake of fire forever and ever. A horrible truth, but clearly a truth from the Bible. Everybody will be resurrected. If you ever wonder and you get into a story in the Bible, and you wonder whether it's resurrection or resuscitation, one thing to keep in mind is this verse right here concerning Jesus Christ. Let Jesus be the measure. Because Colossians 1:18 says, Jesus is also the head of the body, the church, and He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that He Himself will come to have first place in everything. The first human being that's ever been resurrected to eternal life, immortal, glorified, imperishable human body is Jesus Christ. He's the beginning. He's the firstborn from the dead. You could read the same thing in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Jesus came first. He was resurrected first. So let me ask you a question about this boy, the widow of Nain, the son that Jesus just raised from the dead. If the Bible in Colossians 1 said that Jesus was raised from the dead eternal first, that He received the first glorified human body ever, had Jesus already died when He raised this widow's son? No. So was it a resurrection to glorified life, or was it a resuscitation to the same life He had before? It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. Before we close, just because I want to show you a couple of resuscitations in the Bible. How many do you think there are? How many can you name off the top of your head? I'm no show-off. I didn't get 3/4 of these. Can you name Lazarus, the widow's son? Go into the Old Testament. Any stories, anything come into your mind about somebody being raised from the dead? Anybody raise anybody from the dead? I mentioned Elijah. I mentioned Elisha. Both of them raised people from the dead. Remember in the book of Acts? Anybody raise anybody from the dead? What was the scripture that we looked at? Tabitha, arise. Who said that? It was Peter. There's another one in the book of Acts, a kid that's in a window. Paul goes on all day, bores the kid to sleep. The kid falls out the window, falls into the street, dead. Paul goes out there, what does he do? Get up. Resuscitates the boy. Here's some of them, just so you have a list of them. Some resuscitations in the Bible. The widow of Zarephath's son, this was Elijah in 1 Kings 17, Zarephath. The widow of Zarephath's son. He had died, Elijah, by the power of God, of course. Elijah brought this boy back to life. There was another widow, or not a widow, but a Shunammite woman, a woman from Shunem, which is on Mount Moriah, where Nain is. This is Elisha bringing the Shunammite woman's son back to life. Resuscitation in 2 Kings 4, verse 18. When Elisha was put into a grave, His body went back to bones. There was a raid on Israel at one time, and this raiding band came upon a funeral procession. Jews were in a funeral procession, and the Jews panicked, so they threw the body that they were going to bury in a tomb, they threw it in the first open grave they found, and they took off. That open grave happened to be the grave of Elisha. And when that dead man's body touched Elisha's dead bones, that body came back to life. You can read about that, 2 Kings 13, verse 20 and following. This dead Israelite man who was thrown into a grave that they didn't know whose it was, it happened to be the prophet Elisha's grave. And when his dead body touched Elisha's bones, he was given life again from God. Fantastic story. Go read that one, 2 Kings 13. The story we went over tonight, the widow of Nain's son in Luke chapter 7. Here's one I forgot. Jairus' son. Jairus was a synagogue official. I think I want to say in Capernaum. It was somewhere around the Sea of Galilee. But Jairus' daughter had died. You read that story in Luke chapter 8, verse 49. This is the one where Jesus comes in and says, everybody's wailing, everybody's mourning. Jesus said, don't panic. The girl is only asleep. And everybody started laughing at him until he went upstairs and he told her to get up. And she got up. Jairus' daughter, Luke 8:49. Another one we all know, Lazarus, John 11. On the resurrection and the life, he told his sister Martha. Lazarus, John 11, 1-14. And then Tabitha in Acts chapter 9. This is Peter raising this girl from the dead. Acts chapter 9, verse 36. And then the last one I have here is Eutychus. That's the boy that fell out the window when Paul was preaching too long. Acts chapter 20, verse 7. Paul was not preaching too long. The boy lost focus and fell out of the window.
What were the ones that Christ raised up and walked out? Were they just like
No, I left that one off, Terry. Thanks for bringing it up. When Jesus Christ died, there was an earthquake and people came out of the graves. And it said that not until after he was resurrected did they make themselves known. But at the resurrection, people came out of the graves. Clearly resuscitated, not resurrected, because Jesus had just died. He hadn't gone to heaven yet. He had 3 days in a grave coming. I left them off the list because it was a group, not one, and I couldn't number them. But yes, that's definitely the last one, that group right there. Sharp, the rabbi. If I would call you the rabbi, brother. Go to the story, not right now, we're going to close, but go to the story in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 18 to 37. 2 Kings 4, 18 to 37, and look at the things that are in common in Elisha's raising of that woman's son and what we just read about Jesus raising this widow's son in Nain. Let's close in prayer.